fun, and we're going to hopefully enjoy it. But we are going to continue over our life of Christ study, which finds us towards the end of John 8. But before we get started there, let's go to God in a word of prayer. Lord, we come to you this evening prepared to open up your word once again, Lord, and learn more about your word, Lord, and learn how we can apply it to our life and how we can take it and we can share it with others, Lord, and how we can have a closer walk with you. Lord, help us to have open hearts, open ears. Lord, help the message to sink in this evening. Lord, help us to be able to take it to heart and help it to just be beneficial, but also help it to bring glory to you, Lord. Help us to always make sure that our eyes are focused on you and that we're always looking to give you the glorification, Lord, and not looking to take it upon ourselves. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, Dale, did you have an announcement, by the way? Or after?
If you want to make it.
I don't even remember what it was. Oh, you want me to make that now? You want me to make that? Oh, okay. This is big news. I feel like this is like I'm on the news and I'm going to get to break like some breaking news. Dale let me know earlier that Polishing the Pulpit is going to make us one of the host churches next year, which will be great. So we'll have some speakers here on Wednesday and Sunday, I guess morning and night, and Wednesday night. So that'll be great. We'll be in the program. We'll have all that stuff. And if you have never been to PTP before, for visitors or locals, it is well worth the investment, and you will greatly love and enjoy it. I don't even know how many classes you could go to. If you stay the whole week, you can probably catch anywhere between 50 to 70 lessons if you really want to dedicate yourself. It is so enriching. So great news. Look forward to that. And then, be good stuff. Onward to our study, though. Here at the end of John 8, we've just gone over, Jesus has really kind of, once again, I guess you could say, lit into the Pharisees and Sadducees and some of the Jews for things. They've been accusing him of being demon-possessed for the last couple classes that we've been studying. They've said he's out of his mind and this, that, and the other. Yet Jesus has once again gone after being the light of the world. He's told them the truth is going to set them free, which then they made the accusation that they've never actually been enslaved, which coming from the Jews would be quite interesting because they've definitely been enslaved a couple times throughout their history through different times of bondage. So again, we see that they're kind of missing the mark. And what we went over last was the Jews were very confused because Jesus kept saying the Father, the Father, the Father. And in our context, we can see exactly who he's talking about. To them, they're confused. They've gone back and they've tried to basically discredit Jesus because, he's just a carpenter's son. Oh, he's from this town. And you see people in the world do that today. If they want to discredit you, they're just going to make fun of where you come from, what you look like, how much money you do or don't have, whatever it may be, what car you drive, clothes you wear, things like that. But Jesus, in verse 39 through 47, that's where he tells them, well, you're actually of the father, you're of the devil. And then it's when he goes into Satan being the father of lies and everything he says is a lie and he's deceiving the world, this, that, and the other. And so Jesus has just now finished saying that. And in verse 47, he says, actually, I'll just read the last little bit that Jesus said starting in verse 42. But Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me. Now, I want you to think about that too in our life today. Even people today are trying to discredit Jesus. They're trying to say Jesus, this, that, and the other. They want to mock Jesus. If you say you love God, you should also love the Son. So it says, if God were your father, you would love me. For I came from God, and I am here. I came not on my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. Now, I said this last time, but we should circle, highlight, and underline that. Why do people today, people in this time, people in every single time that's ever going to be, why do people fail to understand sometimes? Because they can't bear the truth. Jesus dealt with this numerous times. People left him. We studied that maybe 2 months ago. People left him because his teaching was too hard. When he goes over divorce and remarriage, people are going to say, don't you think that's too difficult of a teaching? Even his own apostles will say things of that nature. And he says right here, he says, it is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You can't bear to hear the truth. And sometimes the truth or the word, same thing, can be right there before you, and people could read it, and they still cannot bear it. They still will not accept it, even though it is clear as day. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind today. Verse 44, it says, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. Now, him being a murderer from the beginning, if you go back to the garden, he brought death upon. It's not that he physically went out and murdered, but when you think about bringing the sin into the world and then what led from them, there wasn't murder much long after that. And so sin and everything else that has taken place, he's the one that's kind of brought death upon this. And so he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Never forget that. There is no truth in him. When the world, think about in the world too, who belongs to Satan? People living in the world do. Now you could say, well, we're living in the world. We're not really, if you're a Christian, you're not really living in the world. You're just passing through. We're just on our way home to an eternal home. We're not living here. We're just hiking on through because we're going to something much greater. People are so, and Jesus said this earlier, but we need to be looking forward to the food that never perishes, not to the food that just lasts a day. We're not trying to just win, this life. We're trying to win the eternal life. See.
It seems strange to me that they didn't have a stronger reaction to this verse of his saying they were of their father the devil, because when Paul spoke to the Jews, some of these same Jews, and said Jesus told them to go to the Gentiles, they started throwing dust in the air, their garments in the air, just being furious. But look, they just calmly said, "Well, you're a Samaritan and have a demon," but they didn't.
Yeah.
It just surprises me that they didn't get more angry at that statement.
Yeah, and I think part of this is probably the fact that, calling someone a Samaritan would have been, in their eyes, you shouldn't even associate with that person. You're walking a different way. You're at the lowest of low, and then saying someone has a demon, you're just trying to discredit them. But I also think part of it is the fact that part of them is intrigued by how great his teaching is, but they also just, every time they try to rebuttal it, it's like they just lose again. And so you're almost at this state of what do you even say back at this point? He's got him, because they've rebutted him, I'd had to go back and count, I don't know how many times in this last little portion we've been studying, and it's just one time after another. They think they have a good rebuttal, and then Jesus is like, well, you're seeing it wrong. But no, that's a good point.
And how angry they got at Stephen's speech.
Yep.
That they stoned him, and yet here they just said, "You've got a demon."
Yeah, and towards the end of it, they're gonna try to pick up stones at the end of the story, and Jesus is gonna end up running out. But they've been trying to kill him the whole time. His whole life, they've been trying to kill him. They've tried to stone him or do something of that nature numerous times, but they never quite succeed until it's his time. So he says in verse 44, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? I tell the truth. Why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not from God, or you are not of God. Now you have to think about the Jews at this point. We're going to get into a little bit more of this as we cover this next portion. The Jews believe in God. That's what they keep saying. Now we believe we got the same Father. We know who this is. And he said, then why don't you love me? And earlier he said, well, why don't you follow what Moses has said? Why are you breaking your own laws? Why are you trying to murder me? Was that not one of the commandments? And he keeps going after them and going after that exact point. And he's like, well, you don't really belong to him, because if you belong to him, you would know who I am and you would love me. And you would listen to these teachings because it's from him who you say you love and who you follow. So as we go into verse 48, this will be half of our focus tonight. But this is the Jews' rebuttal here starting in verse 48 of John 8. It says, the Jews answered him, are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Do you notice whenever people can't win an argument, the first thing they do is do exactly what the person just accused them of doing, which is belonging to a person that is the father of lies. And so what do? They lie. It's the first thing they do. That's really loud.
Psychological projection.
Yeah. And so it's almost that mindset of if you tell a lie enough, it'll eventually become the truth, which you can see people in the world doing that all the time. But Jesus here has them, and they know that they're in the wrong at this point, or at least you'd almost have to think that they're starting to see that they're in the wrong, but they're just going to continue to hold on to it and kind of put their feet in the ground. But they say, are we not in right saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? They go straight to a lie. So Jesus answered them in verse 49 and says, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Now you remember when he says this, they're still not fully understanding what word he's using for Father. I don't think they've quite picked that portion up yet. Verse 50, it says, yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. Now I want to stop right there before we get to the next portion. In verse 50, him not seeking his own glory, as we study through the life of Christ, you're going to see a lot of things as Christ was the perfect example, and of things that you can take from his life that we can apply to our life. Verse 50 is a perfect one. Yet I do not seek my own glory. Oftentimes in life, pride is going to come at the top of why someone is going to sin or why someone's going to do something. In this life, we should not be seeking our own glory. We should be putting others before ourselves because Jesus put himself before us. Jesus said, Father, forgive them on the cross. We should be following the same exact example. That's a high calling to live up to. But we show love because he first showed love to us. And so remember not to seek the glory. Why? Because there is one, capital, who seeks it. Well, who seeks it? The Father. Everything in our life should do what? Bring glorification to the Father. When you go to work, when you talk to someone, when you study the Bible with someone, anything, glorification to the Father. That needs to be at the forefront of our mind anytime we're doing anything in our life. We always need to be thinking about, is this bringing glorification to the Father? Am I doing the Father's will? And things of that nature. So then he goes on and says, truly, truly, so he's putting emphasis on it. I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. Now this is what's really going to kind of set the Jews off at this point. And it says in verse 52, the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. So they've accused him numerous times at this point. And up in verse 48, they're like, well, we're definitely right. And now in verse 52, they just want to hammer down. And they say, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets. Boy, they are just missing the mark about 1,000 times over. And they're about to understand, or they're about to at least hear. I don't know if they'll quite understand it. They keep going back, and now they're going to bring up Moses here later on, but they keep going back to Abraham's the greatest, and they're going to think Moses, has got that, and all these prophets of old. How are you greater than the prophets? And that's why when he's going to say, well,
They don't know what kind of death he's referring to.
No, not at all.
And he does not make that clear to them.
No, not.
He could have, but he has his own reasons for not doing it.
Yeah, the way he reveals things are interesting, and when you really think about it, the things that have got the Jews, and the reason that they're missing the point on Jesus is all because they're focusing on what? Physical. It's always something. It's the lineage. It's the temple. It's always something physical, right? He's going to come and he's going to establish a kingdom here on earth. He's going to build all these things. It's always on earth, on earth, on earth. It's always something physical. They're always going to have something of power, and Jesus is like, no, my kingdom's not of this world. My kingdom is somewhere else, and it's not made with human hands. Dale?
Even his father that he's talking about isn't his physical father, right? The one that they are thinking of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're looking at their physical lineage with Abraham.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because they're going to accuse him of this. Well, they already have numerous times, but they are looking at the Father. And that's why I said earlier, they're not really understanding the Father reference. They're not really understanding the God portion of it. They're thinking of his earthly, I guess you could say. Father, Kathy?
Okay, a lot of times we as humans think we're so important when we, are able to be so intelligent. And all of these guys are sitting there, these Jews are sitting there and they're studying and they know all this, and he has put them in a conundrum, and they're really angry about it because he's got them confused. He's intentionally confusing them and making them think and worry and go, what are you talking about? And they supposedly know everything, right? They've already studied, they already understand it, they got it down to a science, so to speak. And he is turning their world completely upside down. Yeah. And they don't even know what's going on there. They don't realize, they don't see it, and it's making them angry. Mm-hmm. Because, when you think he's pulling the rug out from under their beliefs and their thoughts and everything about it. And when you do that to somebody, it pulls their world apart, especially even if you're studying with somebody from another religion. If you say, okay, here's the way it is, even from a different group
belief,
that claims to be Christian, you know what I mean? If you tell them, hey, there's just a little bit more to this, or you add something, then they're like, wait, what about my father and my grandfather and everybody else? Is everybody going to be lost? And so they're all like, oh, this can't be true,
Yeah. And two quick things. One on that, but one on the other thing. When I say they were thinking more of his earthly father, they're referring to Joseph. I'm not saying that he's the physical father. I'm not going against the virgin birth just to verify that. But I said that and I was like, that probably came out wrong. That's not what I was saying. Okay, that's not what I was saying. I'm not. We'll get into that one next week maybe. No, I'm just kidding. Not going against that. But on Kathy's point, I think we even mentioned this last week or maybe the week before. Sometimes when people see the truth, the reason they'll shut it off is because, well, my father, my grandfather, my so-and-so believe this, and if that's wrong, that means they could be in hell. And that's a huge thing. And then when you look at that, go look at the rich man and Lazarus. What did the rich man want? He was wrong. And what did he want to happen? Can someone please go tell my brothers?
Jesus had his own reasons for using parables, not speaking plainly, sometimes as here, not speaking plainly as we would define plainly today, and then at other times, just right in your face plainly. Yeah. So all three ways he does that, and he knows the hearts of people, and each one has a purpose in mind from his point of view, of course.
Yeah.
Getting back to what Kathy said, these people that are smart, they've got a certain level of pride where whenever they ask a question, it's usually an accusation. It's not really a question.
Yeah.
They don't ever stop to say, hey, explain that. Right? Explain what it is that you're saying to us.
Where are you getting that from?
They don't ask for further clarification. They're just making accusations that he has a demon, and at the end of it, they're going to be mad and take up stones to stone him.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I mean, they're basically standing on their pride, and they're failing to see it. And I'll say this too: it's easy, and I think I've said this numerous times throughout this whole series, but it's easy to get onto the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Jews, and be like, I don't know how they ain't seeing it. You know who else haven't seen it at this point? So his apostles still have not figured out the whole picture. His family ain't figured out the whole picture. People close to him, they ain't figured out the whole picture yet. I mean, you go to the final week of Christ, or the final week of Christ and all that stuff. I mean, you got Peter out there like, ain't no one taking you. We're keeping. I mean, and he's done it numerous times already. I mean, ain't no one killing you. We ain't letting it happen. I mean, even his own apostles that are spending a ton of time, probably more time than anybody with them, still ain't picking it up. And so a lot of people are about to see a whole lot of things. It's easy for us to kind of look back, hindsight 2020, but do keep that in mind. And they're also trying to come out of a lot. And this is a good example. When we're studying with someone that maybe does not know the truth or is a little bit misguided or whatever it may be, they're going to struggle just like the Jews are struggling right here.
Yes.
And it's going to be hard, but Jesus is persistent on it. And Jesus does give examples. Sometimes he uses parables and things like that, but he also makes it where you can understand. And so it goes on to say, and he says, verse 51, truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. Now, they're thinking physical. That's not what Jesus is thinking. Jesus is like, you're going to have a physical death, but you're not going to experience the second death, which is really the death that you don't want to experience because that's eternal eternity in hell. And so he's saying, you're not going to see death because death to a Christian is what? Gain. Always remember that. We're just passing by this world, and what we're going to is so much better than this. So let's be excited. I'm not saying you have to be excited to sit here and die, but let's be excited for what the next chapter is. The next chapter is much greater. And so let us not forget that. Let us not cling to the things of this world, and just want to sit there and hold on to them for eternity, because eternity that we're promised is much better than spending eternity here. So it says in verse 52, the Jews said to him, verse 53. And then so remember, he mentions this thing about you're never going to taste death. And so now they say in verse 53, are you greater than our father Abraham who died, and the prophets died? Who do you make yourself out to be? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. Now that goes back up to the verse we mentioned earlier. If we try to bring glorification upon ourselves, where do we receive our glory? Right here on earth. Temporary. I guess if you want the temporary 15 minutes of fame, I guess you can knock yourself out. I think I'd rather have the, I guess it's not 15 minutes of fame, I don't know what you call it, eternity of fame, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I'd rather have heaven than 15 minutes of fame any day of the week. Any day of the week. Why have riches on earth when you can have riches in heaven? And so Jesus responds and said, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. So now he gives them a clarification on, it is my Father. So here they are thinking that this is Joseph. And now he basically gives them the answer to the test. He said, it is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. Now notice some of the grammatical things here. I'm not an English teacher, but I can at least pick up on some of this. It says, but you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar, like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Now, there's a lot we can break down here, but he gives him the answer of the Father that he's talking to. And then he says, you don't actually know him, but I do. Now, they think they know him. They think they know who God is. We belong to Abraham, and Abraham this, and Moses, and all these other prophets. We know him. He says, but you don't know him, but I do. And he said, if I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar, like you. Because all they're doing is they're lying to themselves. And we're going to get into this in chapter 9, but he's going to eventually call them blind because they're just missing all of it. They're missing the point. Even though they can physically see, they're blind. And so he says, but I do know him, and I keep his word. Now, there's something that we can pick up there. If we know him, what should we be doing? Keeping his word. If they truly know him, what would they be doing? Keeping his word. Are they even keeping the commandments at this point? The 10 commandments? They done they're breaking numerous ones just here in the last couple passages we've been studying, right? They're not using right witnesses. They're trying to kill them. I mean, all these other things. So you'd keep his word. It said in verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. So now he's going after, or are you greater than Abraham? And he's like, well, if Abraham was here, he would rejoice to see this day. Now, he saw it and was glad. Moses. Man, I normally only do that with the ark. Geez, I did it with Abraham. That's a first. So in verse 57, they make the comment, so the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? They're missing it here. What was the promise for Abraham? Did you mention this last Sunday? He did mention this last Sunday. I should have went back and looked at my notes. There was going to be a seed that what?
All the earth will be blessed.
All the earth will be blessed. Abraham rejoiced in that. He saw it by faith. Boy, did he have great faith. Put Isaac up. He's a son of promise. I'm going to put him up anyways because I've been told to. It's a lesson for another day. It's a great story of faith. But he saw it and was glad because he knew that what God said was going to come true, that the seed was going to be blessed. So then he says, Jesus said to them, this is verse 58, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. I had to get Mark to say that one. I am. As I try to put myself in their shoes, they have got to be confused. Because I would be. If I'm there, I'd be like, this is going against everything that I've been taught, essentially, at this point. Now, what they should have been taught, they should have come to this conclusion. What it shows is if you start deviating from the truth and you start setting some wrong foundations, you're going to get the wrong building. And so when you insert one falsehood into the foundation, now your whole foundation is off. Now you don't have a perfect square or whatever you want to build your house on, right? You don't have the right cornerstone. It's now everything else afterwards is going to be off. And so he says, and he uses the phrase truly, truly. So he's bringing attention to it. He's bringing extra emphasis to it. He says, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Now this goes back to the beginning of John too, when he starts talking about the whole beginning and the whole creation. And we've talked about that before, but he makes this comment, and this is where they get the reaction in verse 59. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself, probably went to a crowd because there was probably a crowd behind him, and then he went out, and went outside of the temple.
So it was at the point of hearing what they considered blasphemy,
Yeah.
that they picked up the stones, and that's the same reason they picked up the stones to stone Stephen, because of what he said at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting that Jesus at this point has called them a liar. He's called them the children of Satan, basically, saying they belong to Satan. He said a bunch of things, and you're demon-possessed, this, that, and the other, right? You're a Samaritan. But then he basically, in their eyes, he's going after Abraham. And they're like, that's it. We're stoning him. But what they're missing is what Jesus said in verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. Rejoiced that he would see the day that the world is going to be blessed by the seed, just as it was promised. It's all coming, what they have studied is all coming true right before their eyes, and they haven't realized it yet. But it's all happening right before their eyes. And then they get thrown off again in verse 58 when he says, well, before Abraham was, I am. They're missing the point that he was there in the beginning.
They
Yeah.
got it, that he was claiming to be there in the beginning.
Which is why they,
It's blasphemy.
yeah.
Yeah, and he was claiming deity.
Yeah.
By saying I am, they got that.
Yeah.
Because that's what they think is blasphemous, that he's claiming to be God.
Yeah, they definitely understand what he's saying. What I'm saying is they're not buying what he's selling, I guess you could say. Yeah, they're not processing the whole thing is what I would
And
say.
I've never
They're
heard
not
a preacher,
recognizing what's right in front of them.
Yeah, they're not recognizing what's in front of
and
them.
I've never heard a preacher or any of us to speak as plainly as Jesus does. You're a liar.
Yeah. Dale, I need that Sunday morning. Kathy, what do you have?
I was just kind of making a point. It switches, it looks like it switches from, in verse 30 and 31, and then 32 and 33, right into there, where he's saying, as he spoke these words, many believed in him.
Oh, yeah.
So these were new believers too. Some of them were new believers, and of course some of them were his disciples already. So he's speaking to two audiences, kind of like Dale does every Sunday. He speaks to two audiences. He speaks to the people in this congregation, and then he speaks to people that are traveling in and visiting things. Actually, maybe three, because we've got local visitors as well. But he's speaking to people that believe in him. So at 31, he's sitting there talking. At 31 and 32, he's making them feel good first. It's kind of like when I've got kids that are acting up in the classroom. I go, if you're doing great, that's awesome. Stay with me. Now, for those of you who aren't listening, this is what I need to say to you. Don't take it personally if you're doing what I ask you to do. But if you're not, this is what I need to say to you. And that's kind of what he's doing. He's like talking to the people that believe him. And then, so the message he's saying, the people that believe him and understand it, they're going, yeah, now I get it. Yeah, I get it even more now.
And he speaks to them differently. He says, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Yeah.
Very differently.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And-
Kathy.
No, that's exactly where I was.
Well, and I think, and Kathy, this happened last Wednesday. I forgot my train of thought again. Man, it won't come to me. I know it won't.
It's always when I'm talking.
That's funny. It is. It has been the last 2 weeks. That's funny. What was I going to add to it? Oh, that's what I was going to add. I got it this time. Can't stump me twice. I think some people today think it can be really, really hard to be a Christian. because the world has so much persecution. They'll make fun of you, mock you, and everything else. We're going to see here in chapter 9, which we're about to get into in John, they were really worried about it. I mean, it wasn't just like I'm all in and everyone around me loves me. It was I'm all in and your family might disown you. I'm all in and you might be just cast aside and you by yourself. Yet people were making that sacrifice. Does that not show us today just how powerful his teaching was? Just how much truth he was presenting? Think about this. People always go, well, he didn't really ascend, or they go against the life of Christ. Why would, after they added the last one, why would 12 people start going around preaching and at the end, most of them getting murdered? Why would they stick to the point of death if they didn't think it was true? You know how true that had to be in their heart to be like, I've seen it, I know it, I've seen him afterwards, I know this to be true. I always say this comment, I don't know if anybody else says, like, I'll die on that hill, and it's normally about some silly argument, like, the one that I'll die on, I guess, is that I think mint chocolate chip ice cream is just the worst. It tastes like toothpaste. I'll die on that hill. I'll just live there for forever. But the point is, I say that as a joke. These people actually were going to die. See, the author, you like it, don't you? It's terrible. When you think about the apostles and the early disciples, the early believers, they were literally willing to die on that hill because Jesus died on the hill for them. That's the key. Because he died for them, they're like, I'll go all the way to the point of death. And you look back at the early church, when they had people martyred, I mean, they almost celebrated it because the faith was so great. They're like, if they can do that, then I can do that. I should have that faith. And it fed one another. If Nero was our president, you could say that, there would probably be a thinning out of churches. If he came through and said, I'll put y'all up and we're just going to light you on as candles in my garden. Are you willing to die for him? Because he was willing to die for you.
Well, another part of that we never talk about is that this sort of thing not only encouraged people who were captured to die in faith, but it encouraged others to leave and spread it.
Yeah, I agree. And the persecution actually, like Saul, Saul is the funniest one I think of. Saul out there is thinking he's doing God's work by stopping Christianity and stopping the way, as he says. And his persecution actually causes people to spread and take the message more places. And then God pulls this funny little trick where he blinds Saul, which we're going to get into here just a little bit in a way too, because we're going to mention it with something else. But blinds Saul, Saul prays for 3 days, and we know the whole story that happens in Acts. But then Saul ends up writing, depending on how you want to look at it, he wrote a lot of the New Testament. So he uses Saul to spread the gospel, and then Saul himself ends up spreading the gospel.
He got a new birth certificate.
Paul. I'm sorry, Paul. Yeah, not Saul. Forgot to switch names. It's like Abraham. You got to know which verse you're in.
Reborn.
Yeah. So as we go in, they try to stone him here. And he's now said, he's basically claimed deity. They know what he's trying to say, but they're not picking up necessarily what he's putting down. They're not buying what he's selling, whatever phrase you want to use. They're not giving him that credit. So as we go into chapter 9, it says, as he passed by, so now he's gone out of the temple. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, you have to remember, there's going to be some people here that are probably going to be newer converts. He's probably going to have some people that have been with him for a while. He's going to have some questions like this. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So as you look at this, it's something that people honestly still will preach and teach today, that people are born with certain sins. People are born in sin. People are born with sin. And they trace it all the way back to Adam, and they do all these different things. And then it's when you get into predestination, and some people are destined for heaven, and some people, no matter what they do, is destined for hell. it'd bring you a question to why you'd ever pray or attend church. Because if you're destined for heaven, why you got to do anything? If you're destined for hell, why you got to do anything? You know, why pray that someone finds the truth if they're destined for hell and you can't change it anyways? It just, logically, it just makes no sense. It falls flat really, really quick when you start thinking about it logically. And so here they ask the question, well, why was this man born blind? Was it that he had some sin? Was it that his parents sinned and it's been passed down from a generation? And I'm going to add this too. Just because you grew up in a generation that was sinful and corrupt does not mean that you have to be sinful and corrupt. Your past does not define your future. I hear people say stuff like, well, I grew up like this and that's why I act like that. Awesome. I'm glad you know that. Now let's live for Christ. Because you lived in that, you should know that you don't want anyone else to live in that. Let's not cut back open wounds. Right? Let's live and move forward. Don't let your past define your future. Now, we can learn from our past and help it build our future, but just because you grew up in X town or you had these parents that did this or you had this whatever, doesn't mean that has to just determine that, well, I'm just never going to be good enough. You are good enough because Jesus died for you. That's why you can be good enough. And so it says, he says in verse 3, it was not that this man sinned, so it wasn't his sin, or his parents. It's not his parents' sin, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, as you start thinking about Jesus being the lamb slain before the world, I think there's a whole lot that we're going to see after this life is over that we just didn't see coming. And so this is another example of that the works of God might be displayed in him. Was this something that Jesus just kind of predestined from the very beginning? Was this something that Jesus was going to heal people and they know this? What you see in verse 4 is something that we need to be taking away with. We must work the works of him who sent me. We must be working the works of the Father all throughout our life. And Jesus here is working, which is what he's saying. He says, while it is day. What happens when night comes? Gets a little bit hard to work, don't it? Gets really hard to work. He says, night is coming. The time is coming when you can't work anymore. And that's for all of us. You see it all the time. People will push off making changes. Tomorrow I'll start reading my Bible. Tomorrow I'll start praying. Tomorrow I'll do this. Well, tomorrow sounds like it's going to be a great day if we actually do those things. You can make all these plans for tomorrow, but what if tomorrow never comes? And I'm not saying that to be a scare tactic, but it's very true. It's very true because we don't know what tomorrow holds. And also, why are we sitting there preparing to do all these things tomorrow when we still got to win today? Let's win today and get better today so that we can better face tomorrow in case it does come. Prepare as, I don't know where I heard this quote from. I'm probably going to butcher it because it's been like a handful of years since I heard it. Live as today is your last day, but also live today as you're still planning for 10 and 50 years ahead. Live today like you still got 50 years left, but also live like today could be your very, very last day. And enjoy your last day if today is your last day. Why do you want to leave this world angry, upset, and bitter when we were promised something greater? So let's enjoy today because it could be the last day. Live it for what it is. Christ has given you the greatest gift ever bestowed. He has promised you the greatest thing ever promised. There is something waiting for you greater than anything our minds could ever imagine. And today could be the last day that separates you from that great thing. Man, that's going to be great when we get there. Now, I ain't in a rush, but I ain't going to be sad when I get there because it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Enjoy today because of what God has promised. And don't let the past define you. So it says, we have to work the works of him who sent me, this is Jesus speaking, while it is day because night is coming when no one can work. Then in verse 5, you kind of understand he's going in more to his ministry here. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, what a lot of them are still missing is they're not really understanding the point that in less than 6 months, he is going to be crucified. They're still kind of missing that point, but we're in the final 6 months of his life. And so he goes on in verse 6, and it goes on in verse 6 and says, having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, or means sent. And I found this as an interesting note. So later on after this, rabbis reported. If they reported correctly, don't take this for the truth. I'm just giving you what some rabbis shortly after this time said. The traditions of the day would mean that you could put clay on your eyes for pleasure on the Sabbath, but not for medicine. Nor may the eyes be anointed with spit on that day, which I find interesting because Jesus does both of these. And the pool is probably called sent because its waters are sent from a fountain upstream in the Kidron Valley, so on the east side of Jerusalem. And there's two different names for it you could look up. I won't get into all the back end of that stuff. But what's interesting here is that if that's something that they're dealing with, where did they get that law? If that is something they're dealing with. And that's something that the Jews have done numerous times. They've added things, they've made rules, they've made laws. So Jesus here, he spits on the ground, he makes mud with saliva, he anoints the man's eyes, and then he sends him. He says, go wash in the pool. Now, it's another example. What if he says, awesome, and he goes home? Are his eyes healed? Can he see? Nope. What if he goes to a different pool and washes, because that one's not nice enough? Did he do what he said? Nope. What if he just stood there and said, thank you, kind sir, never went anywhere? Still blind.
It's kind of like Naaman and not wanting to wash in the Jordan River.
Yeah, Naaman said, that ain't good enough for me, right? When he sent him, he said, go and wash. We can say everything we want in the world, but if we don't listen to the command, go and wash, go, be baptized, however you want to look at it, you're just sitting there with the same thing. You've made all these promises that you're going to be good, and you're just sitting there with the same thing. Naaman's a great example. This is a great example. I'm blank on the name. Scarlet cord. Rahab. It's like it's an R or something. If Rahab didn't hang the cord out the window, which was only scarlet because she knew that she was in a bad town, she was going to have an orange one later on. Dale's a big Ohio State fan. Just kidding. No, that's not true. I just knew that Dale was going to say something. Yeah, didn't know he was going to say it. So if she didn't hang that red cord out the window, what would have happened? She'd have died just like the rest of them. What if she went outside the house after she was told not to leave the house? She'd have died just like the rest of them. What is it teaching us? Follow what he has said because it's good for you. It's the right thing to do. It's going to save you. So he goes and he washes in the pool. Let's see. End of verse 7. So he went and washed and came back seeing. When could he see? After obedience. After he washed.
It's poetic, actually, because if you look at the verse 5, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world.
Yeah.
So he gave one man light.
Yeah, which he's about to touch on here a lot and just in the following verses, which I don't know how we're going to get through, but we're going to knock it out. He didn't see before he went and washed. He didn't see, it was after is when he got his healing. The same thing with us today. Don't miss the point. If he says to go and do something, do it. What are you waiting for? I don't understand that in the world today. People say, you ain't got to do that. You just got to believe. And I'm like, even the demons believe. You know, like there's so much more to it. If you believe, why would you not follow what he said? If you believe, why would you not understand that he died on a cross and said, all I need you to do is this or these things?
Being blind, you're kind of motivated.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll get off that tangent. The point is that he said to go and do something, and that person did not receive the gift until he went and did said thing. Same thing with Saul when he turned into Paul. He didn't get healed after 3 days. Ananias came and said, go and what? Go and do this. And then he was washed. People want to say he was healed on the road. Well, he still had sin whenever he was baptized, which is why it got washed off, because that's why he got baptized. Another tangent. Anyways, verse 8. The neighbors. So someone that would know this guy pretty familiar, unless I'd presume he's not just hanging out his house based off what they say, right? So they know their neighbors in this town. It says the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. Now I want to stop right there for just 1 second. Notice how he addresses in verse 11 who healed him. The man called Jesus. He was known. It ain't going to be like that carpenter guy from so-and-so town. And he had these parents, and he claims to be this, and his name is this. It was the guy Jesus. People knew him. The guy Jesus. And he tells them what's happened, and his neighbors recognize him, which is going to come into a second. And they're like, is this really the guy? Like, he looks like the guy. Is this an imposter? Is it like does he have like a twin? Someone else that looks like him? Like, how does he now see? And they're perplexed by it, which is why they ask the question. So now they ask, where is he? He said, I don't know. Verse 13, notice what they do. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Jesus provided the way, he followed the way, and he now can see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. Now, this has happened numerous times. Many people believed, as we just studied a little bit ago, but there's divisions among them. Some are like, well, he's got a pretty good point. Others are like, I will die on this hill. And so, again, there's division, which infuriates the Pharisees. I just lost my place. I'm going to start in verse 16 because I lost it. So some of the Pharisees said... Okay, yeah. Verse 17. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? He said, he's a prophet. So he gives him something pretty high. Now, he's not going the whole way here, but he's at least a prophet. Verse 18, the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight. When you get proved with facts, the first thing you got to try to do is discredit it, I guess, is in their thought. So it says, until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself. Key is verse 22 right here. His parents said these things because why? Because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. This wasn't something lightly. When people decided to follow Jesus, this wasn't just something light. They were losing things. I mean, they could lose their whole family if their family didn't follow them. I mean, they were essentially going to be an outcast for just a little while, and then you're a part of something so much greater. So don't forget that. But his parents just kind of push it off because they're like, we don't want to be anywhere near this, right? Put it all on the kid. And so, verse 23, therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. Verse 24, so for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. Now there's something I think we can take away from this. He makes the comment, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know. There's so many things in life that people are like, well, I don't know why this happened. I don't know why this happened. I don't understand this, this, and this. You don't have to know that. But one thing I do know is that Jesus died for me so that I can have my sins forgiven, so I can live eternally with him. Therefore, those other things over there, I don't have to know everything. I don't have to know all these random details and sit here and argue with everybody over all these things that don't matter about getting to heaven. One thing I do know, and I know how to get there. So he says, I was blind and now I see. Verse 26, they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, which is something that Jesus essentially said earlier. He's like, I've told you this before and you're still not listening. And right here in verse 27, the guy basically says the same thing. He said, I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Which I think is a hilarious question this guy's asking. I mean, he's just walking into this one. He's like, oh, you want to hear it again? You want to become his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple. But we are disciples of Moses. So first Abraham, now they're linking themselves to Moses as well. Verse 29, we know that God has spoken to Moses. Stop here for a second. We've already covered the transfiguration up to this point. Transfiguration's already happened. Who has Jesus spoke to? Moses and Elijah. And what were they talking about? Y'all remember?
What he was going to have to suffer.
What he was going to suffer on the way back to the Father. Anyways, God has spoken to Moses, so has Jesus at this point. The man answered, I'm sorry, I'm off. Let's see. Okay, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. Now remember earlier, they're like, oh, he's a Samaritan. Oh, he came from this town. They've said this numerous times. Verse 30, the man answered, why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. I don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to stop on this for one moment. In verse 31, where it says, we know that God does not listen to sinners, there is going to be some people who are going to make this a very, very, very black and white thing. And if you are a sinner, God does not listen to any of your prayers. I think when they're doing that, they're trying to go after the sinner's prayer, which I think the easy rebuttal to why the sinner's prayer is not good for salvation is the simple fact that it's not even in the Bible. And I think that's really the only point that we even need to make. If it's not even in the Bible, why would we follow it? It's common sense doesn't make any sense. If you're living a life of sin, and you are stuck in that sin, and you are living in that sin, and you're like, God, can you just, help me out here? Let this not happen. You're just living all this sin. Well, you're not even living for him. And so there's a difference here. You look at Saul. What was Saul doing for 3 days? He was praying. We have other examples here, right? So there has to be some, we have to understand the context behind this. It's not just as black and white as if you're a sinner and you're stuck in sin, right? Because people are going to pray going forward as they're making the confession to even accept Christ, right? So there has to be 2 points that I wish I could get in further in this. Maybe we will next week. But I just wanted to say that because I'm sure some people here have probably heard that before, but we do have examples, and we can maybe talk about it a little bit next week. Also, you can even notice the end of it. It says, if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Verse 31, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, which Jesus has already addressed. Man, I got to stop moving my thing as I do it. You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? Right? So now they're going to attack the guy's credit. Well, you're less than us. Why should you be teaching us? Now, there's probably some preachers out there today that'll do the same thing. All of us should be humble enough to be taught. All of us can learn from one another. And so we all need to make sure we have that. No one is above anyone in that. And just because you have studied more and you maybe know more, you do not need to be taking that approach when you're studying with someone that maybe knows less or has not heard that. Be humble. That's the key to it. Don't have pride. So you were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have seen him, which is interesting because when he first saw him, he didn't actually see him because he was what? He was blind. But he did see him, even though he was blind. He says, you saw him, and it was who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see me may see. I want you to think about the contradiction here. You want to talk about some good grammar. I came into this world that those who do not see may see. And those who see may become blind. The problem is that the Pharisees, Sadducees, the Jews, all the other sects of that religion could see. They could physically see. But they couldn't really see. All of us today at least I think, can all physically see. But do you really see? You can know who Jesus is and not know Jesus. They knew God, but they didn't know God. Otherwise, they would have known who Jesus was.
They could see, but the "see" was in quotation marks.
You guys in quotation marks.
Yeah.
They need to put some bifocals on, and they'd be able to see who Jesus was, right? Put it on a shirt. What I think is interesting here is that the blind man could not see who Jesus was. He couldn't physically see the miracles he was performing. He couldn't physically see how Jesus was presenting the lesson. He couldn't physically see how Jesus looked. Yet he believed more than all the people, even in Jesus' own hometown, who physically saw him, people who traveled after him, people who saw the breaking of the bread and him feeding 5,000. People, Peter saw him walk on water. All these different things we can see that Jesus has done up until this point. They have physically seen it, yet people still don't believe. People had seen those things and yet still walked away. Yet this man can't even physically see, yet he sees more than all the people that can physically see. It's coming from the heart. It's coming from the heart. So some of the Pharisees, this is verse 40, some of the Pharisees near him heard these things. So they got to keep listening, right? They're like the rubbernecker of today's time, but they're like just, got to stand on the other side of the wall so you can hear. They heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Verse 41, Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." It's great grammar. What he's going after here is that you're blind because of your lack of faith. You're blind because you're failing to see the point. You're blind because if you truly knew the Scripture and what it was teaching, you would know who I am, because I've been here from the beginning. And you've studied these things. But the foundation is off. They're blind because they failed to see the truth right before them. They're blind in the wrong way. Oh, they can see all right. They can't see what's right in front of them. What's right in front of us is a world that's physically dark and spiritually dark. What's in front of us is a world that wants to silence us, a world that could care less about Jesus and what he did for us all. But what also is right before us is heaven, which makes all this other stuff not so important, does it? The things of the world, not so important when you think about the treasures in heaven.
We have to prove who we are too by our names, our birthplace, our social security number, and our address, a number of things, our mother, our father, all of that sort of thing. And Jesus was doing the same thing, only they couldn't reach out and touch that. They could only remember Abraham.
Yeah.
Didn't identify the father.
Yeah, and when Mark brings up a good point, the Jews were focusing on Abraham, and they were trying to get their salvation from Abraham. People today will try to they think they can get their salvation because their dad's a preacher, their father was a good Christian, their grandpa was this, that, or other, elder in the church, I don't know, whatever you want to say. We have to work out our own salvation. Sue?
The other thing in the audience was the parents of the blind man. I think they believed Jesus had done this miracle, but they didn't want to confess it.
Yeah.
And confess it before those Jews that would throw them out of the synagogue. So they too stopped short of being obedient to confess he had done it.
Yeah.
What was the name of the Jewish Pharisee who went to Jesus in the night to learn more?
Nicodemus.
Nicodemus.
And Nicodemus is going to come up a couple of times. We'll see Nicodemus
So we
at
can
the
see that tendency.
Yeah. Nicodemus will come up at the end, too, of the life of Christ, which we'll study. But the point of all this is that the parents were afraid to go past confession because they were afraid of what might happen to them. I'm not going to say all of them, because some did believe. You can see it in our world today, and unfortunately you can probably see it in some people that sit in a pew every single Sunday. We can be so blind by the truth. We can fail to see the things. We can physically see, but we can't really see. We know who Jesus is, but we don't really know Jesus because we're not making the commitment. So I don't know where you're at tonight. I don't know if you feel like you can't see. that you feel like you don't know the answers, that you wish you knew more, that you wish you would have changed things sooner, that you need to change things now. It goes back to what I said earlier. Your past does not define your future, and your state where you are right now, whether you've not accepted Christ or whether you've accepted Christ and you feel like you've fallen away from Christ and you're not where you need to be, guess what? Your current state, just like your past state, does not define your future, because His patience is still allowing for our salvation. So yeah, your current state can define your future if you want to stay in it, but you don't have to stay in it, which is what's so beautiful. His patience, who knows how long it'll last? It's lasted far longer than what I would have allowed it to last. But praise be to God that His patience is still here at this moment. Live as if today is your last, but live as if you still have 50 years left. When you think about your life, I made the comment earlier, enjoy today. You know how you really get to fully enjoy a day? By knowing that you are a son or a daughter of God. That's how you get to enjoy today. It ain't by the fun things you get to go buy or the fun attractions you get to do in Pigeon Forge or go seeing all the mountains. Those are fun. You know how you really get to enjoy life? Knowing that you're set free from your sin, and that as awesome as some of the things here in this world are, boy, it don't compare to what heaven's going to be like. Don't even compare.
Because we are His patience.
Yeah. So wherever you are tonight, if you have something that you want to make a commitment to Christ, you want to give your life to Christ, or you feel like you've drifted away, you've fallen away, you're not where you need to be, whatever it may be, if you need prayers, if you need help contacting the blood, whatever it may be, your current state, your past state do not have to determine your future. And if your future is not heaven, why not? Why not make heaven your future? It's the best future you could have. What's your 5-year plan? People always ask that. I ain't got to worry about a 5-year plan. Worry about getting to heaven. I know that the Lord's going to provide, just as Abraham said. So if you have anything tonight, I encourage you to come forward as we stand and as we sing with Mark.